Donna Lewis, our guest speaker tonight, is a gardener at a private estate in Aurora of Frank and Elfrida Stronach. In 2005, part of her duties included caring for swans purchased to scare the geese away. By 2010, she met waterfowl expert Harry Lumsden, and this was the beginning of her relationship with the Ontario Trumpeter Swan Restoration Group. Donna has continually educated herself on the swans and has taken several courses and workshops, including the Ontario Master Naturalist course offered by Lakehead University in Orillia, an amphibian and reptile survey course on Beausoleil Island, and a naturalist course that was offered by the University of Toronto at Joker Hill in Newmarket. Learning what the swans needed in a healthy environment and all the interrelated species that depend on that same environment has made Donna an advocate and spokesperson for the swans and the wetlands they are dependent on. Donna is also the president of Garden Aurora and promotes native plants. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank everyone for showing up this evening, and I'd also like to begin it by acknowledging the land we meet upon today is the traditional land of the First Nations of this area and the areas each of you happen to be in. We give thanks for them and the land upon which we meet. We commit to following the example of the Indigenous peoples, gardeners, naturalists, and people that live here. We know that it's important that we too recognize our responsibility to honor, respect, and protect this land, its water, plants, and animals, as we acknowledge its traditional guardians. So tonight we're talking about Hope, the story of the Trumpeter Swans recovery. This is a welcome from my friend. Unfortunately, Harry Lumsden couldn't be here tonight, and he just recently passed away. So these are some pictures and things of his. You may have known him from Doors Open. And he did take a lot of notes. He's still banded late into his 80s, early 90s, attended conferences, spoke to the Weimarsh. And about me, I am a gardener, first and foremost. That's my real job. And this is just a bit of the gardens that I take care of in Aurora. Unfortunately, because it's a large private estate, I don't normally get to share images of these, but I hope you appreciate the work I put into this. And so in 2005, my employers decided that by getting these swans, that somebody suggested it to them, that they would no longer chase away the Canada geese. That's sort of a problem in our area. It did happen to be very nice. And unfortunately, I asked the silly question about, well, we've got the swans now. How are we going to take care of them in the winter? And you ask a silly question, you get a silly answer. And it turned out to be my job. Through all this, I've been learning. And occasionally I run into people. In 2014, someone was wanting to do an article on Harry Lumsden and they wanted some pictures. Anyways, this is my first cover I ever had of the swans. The article is excellent. And you can still find this in Lake Simcoe Living's archives. I also was quite happy to get involved with the swans, and I sent this picture into a contest with Canadian Wildlife Federation. It didn't win that month, but it ended up being selected for the 2014 calendar for February. And these are swans. This actually was taken in February. And just a little info for you is songbirds have between 1,500 and 3,000 feathers. Just, a little songbird. Raptors, that would be hawks, eagles, have anywhere between 5,000 to 8,000 feathers. So these trumpeter swans have about 25,000 feathers and can handle temperatures of minus 30 degrees Celsius for days. So really they are the polar bears with feathers of the bird species. Last year, Ontario Nature did an our swans. This is not my image, but it's a very nice article. So this is Aurora Public Library, Aurora, and believe it or not, this is winter on one of our ponds. This would be a minus 20 something day. The swans are hunkered down. They are actually reducing need for a whole lot of food because they know it's going to be cold for a few days, and we try not to disturb them when they're like this or when it's extremely cold. These are a few shots of me and what I do every single day during the winter. This is one of 6 buckets I have around the gazebo that's over open water. And that is my trusty bucket. And in December of 2019, Harry and 2 of his pals came by to take a look at the swans. So this is the Magna Pond. If you know where Magna head office is, it's on Wellington. And what you don't know is there's a very large pond. One side's bordered by the house I take care of. The other side is the Magna golf course. And I have open water there. And the reason of open water is so that the remaining swans we have from the original purchase in 2005, someplace to be in the winter. One of the things Boss did not know is how long swans lived. They can live up to 25 years, and they do best outside. They are much more a wild creature than they are a domestic creature. So this is taken less than a week ago, and so that was, I call it the Adena Pond. That is the pond on Adena Springs where I work. Adena Springs is a thoroughbred racehorse farm my boss had set up, and we have 2 ponds, and I have open water on both ponds so that the swans can go to either one. At one point, I had some swans in one pond and some swans in the other, but they are very big birds. And if this was a winter Olympics, that was a 10-point landing. They are very big and very good at what they do. So the history of the trumpeter swan in Ontario and North America started out slow. In the 1700 to the 1900, hunting for the fur trade for Hudson's Bay Company. So between 1823 and 1800, these swan skins were sold to London, England. They were also used in millinery, so making of fancy hats and clothing. So you can see how things started slowing down. 1886. That was shot in Ontario, migratory, actually didn't breed. We haven't probably been here for almost 200 years. So you can see the timeline going down as it goes on. Trumpeter swans were actually thought to be extinct in North America. So they found some in Red Rock Lake District, a gentleman by the name of Ralph Edwards, who wrote 2 to 3 books, also discovered 69 trumpeter Northwest British Columbia. So they weren't really extinct. 1954, a breeding population was found in Alaska of over 1,000 Trumpeter swans. I think it was almost 2,000. It might have been over. It was hard to tell because they were mixed in with the native swan that's in North America. So breeding programs started in the United States and Canada, in particular in Ontario. It was started in 1982. Well, the biologist, our good friend here, Harry Lumsden, though he was still working when he started the restoration program, as soon as he retired, he basically worked on it full time for free, relatively speaking, helped raise money to actually make it work. He is not known about for his work with swans, but he has written over 150 papers on several different species as well, and is a respected and internationally known ornithologist, or a person who studies birds. The other interesting thing about him is he doesn't have a university education. He started in the Ministry of Natural Resources as a field biologist because of his already learned experiences. And some of the obituaries that you'll see posted either on Facebook or in different newspapers may mention the thing that we did write up about him. So in Ontario, it was begun in 1982. They began a captive breeding program, and which has released 584 captive reared swans in 54 locations. There is quite a bit of concern about the natural instinct to migrate being lost because of the Canada geese that which were also introduced had a tendency to stay where they were. The failure of introduced swans to mate in the wild, they also migrated out of the release site that was Wymarsh, and that occurred in 1993. They migrated to LaSalle Park in Burlington, and there's continuing to be migrations to that area to this day. In 2007, a population of 700 birds was declared self-sustaining but fragile. And I'll look in exactly how fragile they are a little bit later as we go on. In 2020, the population is estimated at between 2,800 and 4,000 swans, which is a lot better than nothing. So one of the reasons for the decline of swans was for the fur trade. So the strip that you see here has down feather around the collar. There's also feathers around the back of the skirt. This was sort of interesting when I found it because they attributed these feathers to the tundra swan. The Hudson's Bay Company records show that the quills and pelts were trumpeter swans in their records. You'll also see on the other side that there's powder puffs. They were apparently very powder. So they also declined due to sustenance hunting. So people that needed to eat shot them. The real big demise of the trumpeter swan came when guns were introduced into North America and when guns were given to the native peoples that were here. So these are market hunters, and they would shoot all these swans, take it down to the railroad. The railroad would load it up and take it to one of the big cities where they were sold as meat. And Audubon, I'm just going to go back there for a second, see if this works. Okay. Audubon loved using quills from trumpeter swans for all his artwork. And this is the present and historical range of trumpeter swans. There's, I can't point to it. I'm not used to, I like doing this in person a lot better. There's two lines there, one bright red and one of a burgundy red at the top and the bottom of the map. And that shows where the swans used to be. We have these little pockets, and this is their current range. So in 1968, they thought there was about 3,700 swans. This is 3,700 trumpeter swans in the entire world. In 2015, we have that number to 63,000. I had some ask if the trumpeters interfered with the tundras, our other native species of swan, which is a bit smaller. The tundras were decimated as badly as the trumpeters. Oh, they were also used to be known as whistling swans because they're very secretive with their breeding. And if you can see from the tundra range map, their breeding is in the far north. Their migration is all the way down. And I know there's still a hunt in the Carolinas for tundra swans. So as much as they may have been used for some of the Hudson Bay Company, it was most unlikely because they don't even breed in the range that the Hudson Bay Company is. The far, far north will be something they were interested in at that time. So these are the release sites where trumpeters were originally released, as well as the cooperators. So the red ones are where there was year-round feeding. Actually, that's only 2 spots and a couple of little dots. And the blue is where they are left to their own devices. A lot of people asked about the migrations, and that's partly because they are the third largest bird in the world. So flying great, huge migrations would also cost them a lot of effort and sustenance to keep them going. So the easiest way to describe it is they only migrate as far south as there's open water. And they have been migrating. So we have, in these pictures that we have, they are also, there's notes on it, all sighting locations tagged only swans. So all these tagged only swans, this is GPS or anything else. This is regular people like you and me writing in to say, I saw this swan at this location. So we've gone from 12 sightings in 1982 to over 35,000 sightings last year. Now here's a couple of examples of wanderers. And I'll leave this up just a little bit so you can see some of the sites where they've been. So they're moving from Halton region, Perry Sound, all the way down into Augusta, 11. So you see all these little things. We have another swan, Z41s, Renfrew County, Ottawa region, York region, Durham region. These younger swans have a tendency to wander around looking for good locations. Sometimes they will get caught up with seeing other swans. The tundra swans are actually a great resource for the trumpeters because they travel with them a bit. They also will go off on their own. They're quite independent. There's Z41s and P42s travels. They are doing proper migrations, even though these may not be paired up. I have to read all our information again, and my head is full of stuff. So this picture here is taken in Aurora behind Magna head office. And there's the Mute Swan that we own, a wild trumpeter swan. His feathers are fluffed up only because the wind was blowing that day. And the swan that's in the front of them is a tundra swan with a very classic yellow lore. And the yellow lore is the area underneath their eye onto their bill that they have there. They are smaller than the trumpeters. They are also native to North America. The Mute Swan is a non-native to North America. It was brought here for estates and parks to bring a little bit of home to North America. What they didn't do is keep them from breeding, keeping their babies from wandering away. 200 years ago, when they were starting to bring them over here, they never thought they'd end up being a problem. And in the eastern United States, the mute swans go onto shores where there's nesting endangered shorebirds and can decimate entire colonies with their big feet. So we have the trumpeter swans and we have the tundra swans, which are native to North America. In the world, there are 7 types of swans, and we have the largest swan of all those types in North America. So I think of it more as a Roman style nose on a trumpeter. It's a very straight profile. It's very sharp. The eye seems like it's part of the bill. It's definitely a black beak, and on the bottom of the bill, you sometimes see a red border. That is usually during breeding season, you'll see that. The tundra swan, for those of us that have seen them before, like a teddy bear version of the trumpeters, their bill is smaller in proportion to the head, with a much more dish-shaped profile. So it's a little bit more distinct, and it's definitely a much roundish head shape. And the eye is usually quite distinct from the bill, and it doesn't hurt that it usually has a distinct yellow marking on the lower. So this is taken at the Y Marsh. The Y Marsh was one of the release sites for all the different swans that were cooperated throughout Ontario. The Toronto Zoo was another location as well. So it's sort of neat seeing what's your wingspan. This is very neat, interactive style of educational board that's up at the Y Marsh. And here's a swan just showing when he grows up, he's going to be big. So what you will see breeding in Southern Ontario is the trumpeter swans and the mute swans. The mutes do breed in the wild, and eventually we're hoping that there won't be quite as many of them. They are cute and everything, but are, like unfortunately so many other things in Ontario, an invasive species. They are cute at a few days old. The late fall of the hatch year look quite good, and I'll show you in a few minutes how they do go through a gangly phase. And at 10 months, that's what they look like, and they can also fly. So I've had accidental visitors here, and I've probably, because of we having open water here in Aurora, there's been ducks that have benefited from it, and not just the mallards and the black ducks that I can visit, or the Canada geese that I still can't get rid of. So we had this little tundra cygnet show up one year. I had a pair that comes from the farther north, and when they showed up, all of a sudden, I was like, what's wrong with that cygnet? He was only the size, a very little bit bigger than a Canada goose. And you can see in the one picture how much smaller he is than the other guys. So these are all adult swans, but one of these things is not like the others. This guy here, if you take a good look at his beak, the way his eye is much more separated from his beak as well. And well, I can tell when he, especially if he speaks, they do a little bit more whoo, whoo, than they do the trumpet sound. And I'm not going to imitate this trumpet sound. No one needs that. So trumpeter swans need wetlands with a water depth of 1 to 5 feet. They need something to eat while they're there too. So they need a mix of emergent things that come up from the bottom of the pond and submergent vegetation, things that stay in the pond. So they start building and repairing nests. They're very loyal to their nest sites, usually in mid-April. The nest diameter can be close to 6 feet. In that picture that just popped up, you can see there's in the very middle of it, a sort of an opening with a brownish spot, that would be the nest. They often build on top of a previous year's nest or a beaver or muskrat lodge. And where a beaver can engineer his surroundings by building a dam, create the depth of water that he wants, it also happens to be very much the same needs of a trumpeter swan. So their incubation is 3 days. And they're fully fledged, meaning that they can fly at 15 weeks. Don't you wish your kids could leave your house at 15 weeks? So this is a very sweet photograph. This is something trumpeter swans aren't known to do. And if you look at the one swan, there's 4 little cygnets, baby swans, swimming beside him, and the other swan has a lazy cygnet on his back. So a good friend of ours in the restoration group, Gary Lane, he is the insane person who does the correlation of data and could give me those numbers of how many people have been reporting sightings. He does have some help, but he's the one that had to go through Harry's handwritten ledgers over the years to put that data into formats that can be kept and updated as time goes on. So he's a very good photographer, and there's just a photograph in the 4th. This is another June the 4th, June the 13th. They're just a little bit bigger. June the 18th. They're still very cute. Getting a little bit bigger now at June 22nd. July 14th, they're starting to get into the teenage years. July 28th. As we've moved through this to August 6th, cygnets have been lost. There's not a high percentage that survive it to adulthood. They have to get through the first year. There's lots of little things that can prey on them. They can be taken by they can be taken by pike, they can be taken by turtles. Mink can get them. And sometimes a misadventure also happens. Don't worry, there's still 3, but this is definitely a gangly phase. August 18th. So their feet are quite orange when they first hatch. They do change to black. He's getting bigger. He almost got flight feathers. September 15th. October 6th. He's growing up big and strong. So this is a picture we took in 2019, I believe it was. It's probably just before it was family day before the pandemic hit. So we have our crew there. We have a few missing, and there's some that I don't always remember to. We have a quite widespread and industrious group that is all over Ontario. And because of Zoom, it may be easier for us to get together. So Hamilton Harbor is famous because that's where our first migration happened to. So right now it's a wintering grounds for about 200 plus birds. It's not the only place, but it is a great place for the public to see this many swans at once in Canada. Hamilton Harbor was an extremely polluted harbor, and they should be very proud of how much cleaner it is. There's a minimum exposure to lead there because unfortunately they basically did kill their harbor, so there's no fishing there for quite a long time. So there is minimum exposure to lead. It's a protected area with natural food sources. The water's kept open there mostly from the natural wave action from the lake. 80% of the banding in Ontario gets done there, but we may have to look at that because they've had some really good luck. It's a couple of other places, including Bluffers Park, which is in Toronto, and Bobcaygeon, which is, I believe, east of here. Somebody will tell me that you're crazy, but wherever that is, I haven't been there. I wasn't able to get there when they were doing it. There's a tremendous amount of banding done there because it's very easily accessible. It's safe to do so. And they can also get a lot of public education interaction, and it's very easy to observe them. Just down the road, speak, is Coote's Paradise by the Royal Botanical Gardens. It's not only providing potential nesting habitat, there is nesting habitat in there, and swans are nesting. So winter at LaSalle Park in Burlington, we were having there quite often, and it was a lovely, large, interactive where we got to speak and talk about swans, and usually we managed to tag a few too. Lots of photographers. I like the swan's expression on the second picture. Are you looking at me? So these are, you can see the big bridge in the background. It does make for some stunning photographs. So it's not an elegant thing to catch a swan, but if you see how we catch the swans versus there's, you probably can look up YouTube, Mutual of Omas Wildlife, I forget, was it? Mutual. Was an old program in the 70s. They'd go out and they'd do different things. At one point, they would, during the summer months, they literally run down the swans with boats in order to catch them and tag them. We, at LaSalle Park, they bait them by offering food. They get sort of habituated to humans, not too afraid. And then we call it hand catching. We catch the birds by hand. We don't normally have to use nets or anything else. So we do poke and prod them a little bit in that we just check their sex. And we do a few other things, take some measurements. And I have a video coming up, what we do right now, because we're also trying to do a lead study to see how much lead is showing up in their systems. Fortunately, that's on hold right now because of supply chain issues with the lead test strips. So each of these swans are getting a stainless steel lock-on band. And you can see on the bottom image, call 1-800-327-BAND. This is the number we need if you want to report it to us. The tags that you see on the swans, in Ontario, we use this this tag to put on their wings. It's not too heavy. It's like having an earring on, but it only lasts about 3 years. The leg bands, this particular style of leg band will last mostly for life. Let's see if this works. So this is our master bander, Kina. And there's a whole bunch of things that we do when we tag a swan. So this is part of what they were doing. They're taking blood for the lead studies. So we keep trying to work with different universities or researchers to see what's happening with our swans in Ontario. Kina is also a licensed veterinary tech, a master bander, and just birds are not quite the same as mammals when it comes to their genitalia. A 9C is the size of the band. Determining the age, if you see some brown and a mostly white bird there is, it's most likely 2 years old. And you can see as they're pushing the feathers aside, how many feathers are there. Body weight is also important to make sure that they're not underweight. It'll give you a heads up that something might be wrong. So these are leg bands, swans that have lost their tags. If you have a decent camera, you can get a picture of their leg band without running them down. But it takes a lot of photos. And occasionally the bands will be put on so that they're upside down. So the males get their leg band on the right side and the females on the left. That's probably the only time males are right, for those of you. But sometimes we get it wrong. Swans know male and female, but when they're young, sometimes trying to determine which sex they are can be difficult. So the present dangers to the future of the swans in Ontario, our biggest one is the lead poisoning. And that's from the fact that they can eat a lot deeper into the water than Canada geese or ducks can. So they pick up lead shot and lead fishing sinkers because they're the right size for them to use in their gizzard to grind their food. Most birds will pick up some sort of grit, I think is how most people describe it, in order to digest their food. Another problem we have is because the easiest place to put a hydro line to get it from point A to point B is in a straight line, and going around a marsh is not usually an option. They like to go right straight through it. So collisions with unmarked power lines is something that happens. The loss and degradation of wetland habitat is huge in the southern Ontario, not as horrible in northern Ontario, but the wintering grounds are in southern Ontario, and they're constantly being made smaller and smaller by people wanting to use these areas for recreation. And they need a fairly quiet area with open water so that they can bathe, eat, preen, and rest. Human interference, such as harassment by boaters, snowmobiles, personal watercraft, dogs, and occasionally the illegal killing of swans also hits their numbers. There is some natural predation by wild animals and birds. Golden eagles can take them. There has been a report of a bald eagle taking a trumpeter swan, but bone was recovered and there was high levels of lead, so the swan was already in danger as it was, and there is disease that will get them as well. So the ingestion and entanglement in discarded fishing line and hooks is something that happens. So this swan was caught. He didn't have to go into rehab. It was a fairly simple way to remove it. This other swan over here is actually a cygnet, so he's a first-year bird. And the ice is built up on the line of the fish hook that's caught in his mouth. This swan is another cygnet, young swan, has a bunch of fishing line that was entangled around something, went to feed, and it got caught on him. This fellow has a fishing hook with a spinner still attached to it in his mouth. And this guy, the hook was on the back of his neck, and there's ice building up on a line, and it ended up getting so heavy that he could barely lift his head out. We caught him. We kept him warm for the evening with some food and some water so the ice would get off his feathers, and I released him next day and he was fine. That weighed over a pound. So this fellow with this wonderful hook in his mouth, I caught, took him to Toronto Wildlife Center. Here's the x-ray that they put up, talk about it. They had to go in twice, the first time to remove it. They had to go in a second time because a bit more infection got into the wound and they had to clean it out. So when there's an autopsy done or a biopsy, they're sent in for necropsy. We get these sheets back. This is a picture of what was found in the gizzard, the stomach of a swan. So the remains of eroded spit shot fishing weight, approximately 1 centimeter in diameter, was present in the gizzard. It only takes one or no more than 3 lead shot pellets to kill a swan. And they're present in the environment because we may stop using lead over water right now for duck hunting and goose hunting, but a history of it for, I guess it's close to 200 years now of us shooting animals. So it's present in the water. It doesn't go away. So this is the unmarked power lines. So this is Desjardins channel. There are 45 hydro wires over a body of water the birds want to go to. So the swan broing, he walked out of there and he was actually saved. That doesn't know what happened. There was a plague that put him. This young bird, Cygnet, is a survivor of suspected collision. Even when he's flying, that crook is still on his neck. So we do also have a problem with good-natured people trying to feed swans. And some of the food that they feed them is basically like us walking up to young children and giving them candy bars. It's not nutritious. So it's something called angel wing. It affects waterfowl, including trumpeter swans. It causes the last joint in the wing to twist, making them basically unable to fly, because the last joint has their flight feathers, the big ones that you saw in the earlier pictures that were with the, I guess, anywhere from 10 to 14 inches long, these big flight feathers. When they get a diet with excessive intake of carbohydrates, just like the rest of us, feeding waterfowl foods like bread and popcorn is considered one of the leading causes of angel wing. Some genetics may be involved, some may be more susceptible than others. For the most part, young swans will grow much better if they're left to their own devices and eat a diet of natural foods, such as, well, whole untreated corn if you have to feed them. But they want to eat, when young swans are growing, they want to eat greens. They also will eat quite a bit of snails, little worms. It's about the only time that they actually eat insects and crustaceans and things like that. And it's partly because they want to get the calcium into their system as well. When they're an adult, they're basically a vegetarian. Occasionally pictures will pop up, different swans playing with fish. They don't necessarily eat them, and the fishermen don't have to worry that the swans are after the food, the fishing that they want to do. The swans are after the vegetation that the fish are around. So one of the problems is loss and degradation of wetland habitat and wintering grounds. And if anyone has been following any of the things with the proposed Bradford bypass going through marshes and wetlands, you can see how people are getting more and more up in arms, because these are the kidneys of our planet. This is clean water. This is what helps clean the water so that we have water. And without them, and with continuing to degrade their habitats, we won't be able to have swans, ducks, turtles, frogs, salamanders, or probably drinking water either. So there's things you can do to help. If you can, Or even if you want to give a gift to a fisherman friend of yours, get them some weights for their fishing line that is not lead. Most people do not hunt with lead shot. I would recommend if anyone does hunt with lead shot, even if it's for upland game, don't. Partly because if you don't find the animal you've shot, it's going to be predated by birds of prey, scavengers, and other things, and they'll ingest that lead shot. So in California, there's a huge issue with the California condors, an endangered species, dying from lead poisoning from eating game that's been shot and eating the lead. They're not over water. But if you can avoid lead, we don't need to continue to put it back in our environment no matter what. If you are a fisherman, most places where there's a lot of fishing have your use line here. If you really, after seeing some of the hooks and different bills and beaks and bodies, we need you to remove that fishing line that got caught as much as you can. And if you have some that got tangled and you cut it off, just don't throw it on the ground. Please take it and dispose of it properly. If you see sick and injured swans, you can report them to your local OSPCA or your animal control in your local areas. We do have rehabilitation centers. Most of them are operating as a nonprofit. I'll have a list of them coming up too. If you see someone harassing swans, whether it's trying to get a selfie, unfortunately that's happened, or trying to catch them because they think that's fun, you can report them. They are you just don't harass wildlife. It's just simply something not to be done. So there's Ministry of Natural Resources tips line. You can also contact Environment Canada Wildlife Enforcement. So what else you can do is protect your waterways and marshes. So be vocal. Say no to development on marshes and wetlands and waterways. Say no to perfectly manicured all the way to the edge. People are starting to realize it, and a lot of parks are also starting to realize that they need that 1 yard buffer, at least those Canada geese from going up onto the grass that's been fertilized. Its protein content is now so high that it's extremely tasty to the Canada geese and other things. But if you have that by your waterway, you're also preventing runoff from any of the fertilizers and chemicals that may be put onto that grass as well. So it may sound strange, but reduce, reuse, recycle. The more we keep of trash out of our landfills and trash floating around that got escaped from bags that might have broken open or anything else, the less of that's going to show up in our environment, the less of it will not show up either around the neck of a swan, a duck, a turtle, anything like that. So reduce, reuse, recycle. And I also put in use native species when you're planting in your yard. Part of that is also because, yes, of course, my alter ego is super pollinator. But the more native species that you have around, there's more native bugs that are there that feed the different things. You're actually contributing to the biodiversity of our planet by having more than native things around us and around our environment, around our waterways. The healthier they all will be. And the other thing is spread the word. Swans were almost extinct. Now they're not. And it's people like you and me that did it. So we still track our swans. I say our swans, very possessive of these lovely birds. They live a long time. They can live in captivity anywhere from 25 and upwards to 30 years. In the wild, average span, they say, is about 12 years. Because we've tagged our swans, we know we've had a swan that lived to almost 27 years. Because we've tagged our swans, we know that there are divorces. They may mate for life, but If the fellow doesn't provide, or if his fertility is too low, she's going to find herself another mate. We also know there's a little bit of incest that goes on sometimes. And so we have been worried about the genetic pool of the trumpeters. But as they have these safe havens, wintering sites where they can conglomerate. So at my location, it is like a large meet and greet, all you can eat buffet speed dating site. It's also a little bit of a daycare as well when they start leaving their cygnets here and they go back home to their nesting site to have another clutch of eggs and have more lovely birds throughout the province. And it's great. But because we have them tagged, and even the ones that aren't tagged, we want to know where they are. So the Marsh Wildlife Center has a website as well as our own email that I've put there. So the Marsh Wildlife Center has a website and they have a form that you can fill out if you happen to see swans. And this is some of the information you required for the sighting. If there is a wing tag or a neck color, they will be from the States if there's a neck color. So there's a color and a code that's on it. If there's no wing tag, but you do happen to see a leg band, mention you've seen a leg band, even if you don't get the number on it. But of course, if you can, or if you have one of those beautiful camera lenses that I have lens envy for, you can probably get the number. The location, if you're using a cell phone to take a picture of some swans in a marsh as you drive by, most likely your cell phone is going to have a GPS location. But if you can even give us an intersection, the bearing, and just to the nearest town, it's helpful. We also need to know, we wish to know the total number of birds seen, whether they're marked or unmarked. And if you happen to notice behavior, nest building, mating in a nest, we're going into the second year of the Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, and that information is also very helpful to everyone. The one thing we do ask, if you see a swan with babies, the little lovely cygnets swimming around, as much as it's fun to post it on Facebook, you could, but don't tell people where they are, because those babies are most vulnerable at that time. And we don't want to scare their parents away, and we don't want to make them think that they have to move to another marsh, because they will take their babies over a kilometer over land where they're extremely vulnerable to attack to find some place that may be safer. So we can also help rescues that save and rehabilitate trumpeter swans. So one of our members, Kina Intini, is a licensed rehabilitator. The Toronto Wildlife Center is quite great in that they can, if necessary, do water rescues, whether it's in summer or winter. Shades of Hope is in Perfalot and is great. It's just a fantastic place. And they have contracts for wildlife from the surrounding municipalities. And there's also Sandy Pines in Napanee that is also a very good rehabilitator. So if you see a sick swan, you can try contacting your own animal control first. If you happen to be on Facebook, you can see if you contact someone in our Facebook group. But please remember, people of the Ontario Trumpeter Swan Restoration Group, we're all volunteers. We don't have the equipment to do water rescues at all in the wintertime. So the Ontario Trumpeter Swan Restoration Group, licensed rehabilitation aviary, boy, that's a mouthful. This is near Burlington. And so this is Kina's set up here. This summer, she had quite a few more than 2 orphan cygnets. And you see that big bird that's there is actually a decoy. And it just keeps them company. And the green stuff that's all around them is duckweed. So the Wildlife Center has been to my place a couple of times trying to help me with lead poison swans, trying to catch them and take them away. So this is in 2016. Sometimes I remember to take out my phone and take a picture. This just happened this January. So Emily is a paid worker at the Toronto Wildlife Center. Nate is a volunteer. And Owen is one of my co-workers here in Adena Springs, and I was on the far side. So I managed to grab a picture of them as they rescued 2 of my swans that day. Unfortunately, both succumbed to their disease. So other sources of information for trumpeter swans, the Trumpeter Swan Society in the US, their website is phenomenal. There's a lot of information, a lot of links, a lot of things you can go to. Canadian source would be Bird Studies Canada. Canadian Wildlife Federation, and I also put it again at the bottom, Hinterland's Who's Who, also has quite a bit of information on trumpeter swans. If you want, eBird, which also is an app you can put on your phone so you can record birds that you happen to see, is very good and has a lot of information. iNaturalist is the same thing, but iNaturalist is great in that it doesn't matter what you see out in the wide world, plant, animal, insect, amphibian, let me try the amphibian, reptile, you can record it, take a picture. If you don't know what it is, with luck, iNaturalist has a lot of people that keep checking to see what people are posting to make sure you get the right name on it. A lot more information comes from the US as well in the Cornell lab, all about birds. And of course, since this is a library talk, there are lots of books in your library. If you want to start birding or you want to start learning about different things out in natural environment, they also have various guides you can try out. So take them out of the library, try them out. If you don't like it, there may be a different guide that is more intuitive for you to use. You can try several before you go out and decide that you're going to buy your own guide. Most of these are over $20 to purchase. A lot of them are over $35. So if you get to try them out from your local library to see if you like it so that you will use it and carry it with you to increase your skill in your new hobby of bird watching, or finding out what the names of the wildflowers are or the butterflies, insects, whichever you'd like to do. The Toronto Zoo has an Adopt a Pond program. So trumpeter swans, they're usually on a pond. So the Adopt a Pond program, as much as they're asking you to have possibly water in your area so that you can have more amphibians in your backyard, basically you're creating habitat. But they have guides that are absolutely great for kids to understand and learn. You can also go there to listen to their website, to listen to the calls of frogs. And it won't be too much longer before we'll start hearing the calls of frogs and the hum of mosquitoes. I'm actually looking forward to that now. And if you go on YouTube, you can still see all those hinterlands who's who, which includes trumpeter swans. So this is what we're called, the Ontario Trumpeter Swan Restoration. That name may be changing shortly as we become more, as we evolve. Donations can be made to the, if you'd like to help with our trumpeter swans, buying tags, helping pay for the gas for our volunteers to get to various locations, or helping with the rehabilitation of injured or sick wild trumpeters. You can donate to the Amherst Wildlife Foundation. And the address there, leave it up long enough, but we are making recordings. You can watch this again on YouTube so you can make sure you get the right address. So there's way too many people to mention all at once. And I am petrified I've forgotten somebody. But I want to give thanks to all the people and agencies that have shared photos and information on the internet, which is where you guys can also go to find some more information about the trumpeter swans. And I also have to thank our Facebook group. When I joined, there was about 100 people on it. We're now 3,900. I hope some of them are able to join the evening. And I hope they've learned something as well. So I'm getting close to the very end and ready to take in questions. And I'm probably running a little bit late. So we got to do what we can. There is no planet B. This is the Earth we have. Let's take care of it. Because unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. I love that, Dr. Zeus. So thank you. And now, if I'm lucky, I can take some questions.